another month of reflections and, be inspired by many but influenced by few. And June 2026 was pretty awesome. I saw quite a range of, I got to experience quite a range of conversations for sure. But I want to start out with a sort of an awesome review from a couple months ago from user speaking 247. I'd say your name if I knew you. But this is what they wrote on Apple Podcasts. And I really think it's a great way to sort of summarize the podcast to date. This isn't your typical wow. This isn't your typical career podcast. It's more like a quiet, honest reckoning with what work really means. Tony creates space for his guests for deeper reflection, leaning into tension instead of rushing to easy answers. The conversations feel thoughtful, raw, and refreshingly unpolished, inviting listeners to sit with the complexity of burnout, purpose, and identity. It's a compelling listening for anyone questioning not just what they do, but what it matters. And you can see right there that, sucks for me trying to read at the same time. So that work sucked right there. But certainly love the review. So thank you so much for that. And I really resonate, right? I don't want the easy answers. I don't believe that, life is, sometimes sold to us that there's these quick fixes, right? That if you get a coach, you do these 5 things, you're going to be on your way. And yes, there's the time to tune up. I remember when I was, practicing hard, very hard, a lot of time hours for competitive golf. And I would see a swing coach, right before the tournament. Right. So I think, but don't overlook the fact that it takes hard work, right, to be able to do the things that you want to do. So again, thanks for everyone taking the time to write reviews. I want to make it sort of a thing now with the monthly, reviews, just to kind of give a shout out back to the audience. Because one of the things that's important about reviews is for you listeners, it's a chance for you to now begin to articulate and I want to say take credit, but publish and sort of own that, articulation of what you're saying. And I think that's really, really sort of an awesome skill to have and something that I would love to share on future episodes. So July, 2025 is when I started this podcast and we hit 75 episodes, this past month of June 2026 and it was really sort of amazing. At the time has been flying by, if you will, certainly a flow state, here and there. Definitely a lot of challenges, right? There's definitely times that still suck again with people ghosting, on the podcast and not telling me for days later and coming up with an excuse and maybe something happened, right? I mean, that's my first thing. I always give people a couple shots. I get it, life happens. But again, 75 episodes, amazing, right? And, my goal is to hit 100. And as we've been learning on the show, with my reflections, even with guests and the questions, it's important to have goals for sure, right? So I want to hit 100 episodes. But, remember, it's not always about the goal. It makes me think about Zig Ziglar. Everybody wants to be free, but when you take a train off the tracks, it's free, it doesn't go anywhere. If we don't have goals, we're not going to go anywhere, right? A train still has to get to the destination. So we need to set a course for something and just keep working and not be so attached to the outcomes. Of course, strive to get to the station, right? I'm not saying get on the train and go off the cliff. Obviously work hard to cross the finish line. So our first guest, Mark DiCarlo, the guy was awesome, right? He's like calling me, on his phone. He's like, "Oh, shit, I'm on my way, and I got in a meeting, and I really want to be on this podcast." And I said, "Absolutely, man." I mean, I was honored to the fact that he wanted to be on the show. So he was on Seinfeld. He was an actor, a voice actor in Jimmy Neutron, a TV show I used to watch on Nickelodeon growing up. Got some more kind of cool work coming out. The guy was awesome. I mean, he was just so much fun to have on the show. And what I loved about him is that, he reminds us that we need to live our lives. He's done all these different types of relatively different things, right? Still in the entertainment realm of work, if you will. And, but what I love about what he indicates is that it's not about just like one single purpose. It's about doing all these different things, right? It's not being busy either. It's in being engaged. And that's something that I find, when I tell people the things that I am working on, they're like, "Oh, wow, Tony, you're so busy." Well, it's not busy. Like, let's make it clear that busy to me, busy, you're like hiding something, right? You're being busy to avoid something. When you're engaged, when you're being productive, being effective with what you're doing, now you're living, right? And that's the simple truth. And, again, it's not to say that you need to make your own TV shows or write your own books, whatever, but you can be, engaged and effective in your relations that you have with people and the immediate work that you have now, even if you think it sucks, right? And, the whole conversation with Mark too, again, you've been hearing the theme. I can't help but the bias of phones is that no one cares. No one's going to give a shit about your workout that you put online. Yes, it makes you feel good. Some people will, give a few likes, but, it's like it's entertainment, right? You got to imagine yourself, you're putting it on there. The people scrolling on there, well, they're not working out. They're just scrolling online. So to me, it's sort of it's a fine line, right? And I asked him the question, how do you balance, right? Especially in his industry, this idea of being online and, entertainment. And of course, he's in the entertainment industry. And I think it's, again, that fine line of just finding that sort of rhythm to post and sort of the types of posts, right? When Mark is posting, he's posting shows, he's done the work. And one of the things that he says is that the work is to, essentially study the lines. And then the act is, and then to the act of playing them out, that's the fun. That isn't the work, right? So we all have to study our lines. We all have to do the reps at times, but know that, the performance, will come, when we prepare ourselves and look forward to it. So then we had my friend Matt, right? Matt Oganowski. He's been a listener since day one. And, at first he was hesitant to come on the show. And he had some things going on in his life for sure. And I could understand, some things that he was working through on the personal front. And, but, his reasons for not wanting to be on the show kind of floored me in the sense of, he felt like he hadn't accomplished anything, right? I brought a lot of coaches on, Mark DiCarlo, he's got these TV episode shows that are, very popular. And I'm thinking to myself, Matt is the perfect person to bring on the show, right? Because it's not all about the fame and the glory and whatever the hell else people think success is. And I think Matt sums it up the best out of I think I'm on like 81 episodes to date now in terms of what success, really is. And people have danced around it, right? I think people learn quickly that if they say money on the show, they're going to get a sour look from me, in terms of success. It's certainly important, right? Don't get me wrong, it's certainly important. But, Matt defines success as personal enrichment. And I think that's a phrase that we need to start using more in our conversations today around work because, he even said it, right? He's not the best drawer, but who gives a shit, right? He still can enjoy drawing. He still can enjoy playing guitar. He can still enjoy these things, right? And I love the fact that he's striving towards personal enrichment, right? It's such a different tone. Think about it. It's not like there is no finish line with personal enrichment, right? There's no, oh, I'm 100% enriched, It's not, become saturated with all this joy and pleasure. It's almost like this, built-in idea of that you're always sort of growing. And Matt was perfect for that. He was one of my, even though he's my best friend, obviously, but, one of my favorite guests to have on the show because he really represents, in my mind, not that I'll say the ideal, listener, but the most common, right? Not everybody wants to start a business. Not everybody wants to be a coach or an entrepreneur. And let's face it, all of us have come from quote unquote 9 to 5 jobs. So to me, there's just a pool of missed conversations where we're not having today, where it's just like, oh, well, let's get out of the rat race and, get onto the fast track and get to retirement. Let's be the part of the new rich and, make all this money and have all the time. And, again, we need money, right? Obviously, I need money to host this podcast, to have this microphone in front of my face, to have eaten my breakfast this morning, et cetera, et cetera. But again, Matt's message of personal enrichment, that's what we need to be thinking about. So then we had Lynn and, 40 years in the field, right? We go from, like the entrepreneur in a sense, of Mark, and then Matt's kind of the transition here. He's in his 40s, I guess midlife, whatever, with his career. And then we have Lynn Friest, and, he was 40 years in the field plus, and that, his work now is realizing that retirement is just a transition. And I love that. And I asked him, first off, how did you make it 40 years, right? Plus in a company because, that's what's sold to me, right? The same, get the same song and dance, get a degree, get a job, and get married. And those aren't bad things, but that song is a little outdated, right? We need to intertwine it with some different values today. And, obviously you can get married, get a degree, get a job, but the idea of staying in a job for 40 years was just, it's unheard of today, right? Most people, the statistics I believe when I looked years ago is like 2 to 3 years people will stay at a company before they leave and they transition. And, he said, sure, there was change, right? But there was something that kept him in terms of like, you know, I don't know if it was family, but it's the workplace culture, right? I mean, that's what this sort of podcast is dancing around, right? That's what my PhD in industrial organizational psychology wants to, that's what I want to study is this workplace culture and how to build flow into it to get people to want to come, right? To get people like Lynn and Matt to want to become personally enriched, right? I get frustrated when I hear time and time again that, "Oh, I hate my 9 to 5 working for the man, like, that sucks, like, go do your own thing." And it's like, that's such a Western culture perspective, I'm gonna just say narcissism, of just why do we all wanna plant our own flags? Life is a team sport, right? I get it. We definitely, want to take credit for things, in some regard for what we do, but where's the idea of team, right? It's just crazy to me. I don't get it. Maybe it's just my narrow view of my own perspective living in the United States. But I find that, the United States is very cutthroat like that, right? It's this idea of hustle culture. I see the unspoken competition, right? Even with other podcasters and the other guests and hosts that I have on the show. Like, I'm not competing with you, right? Right. You have your own message, people, I'll message them and they like shy away from messaging me back because they're like intimidated or what have you. And it's a shame, right? It just kind of shows that I don't say in it for the wrong reasons, but we're not thinking bigger picture, right? Of how we can sustain something for a long time. And I think that's what Lynn really reminds me of is that when you stay true to your values, you can stay the course of a lifetime. And then we had Saw Mint. And, I loved it. Not to make her life very seem simplified, but she really reminded me of life being simplistic, right? Her paychecks, if you will, went back to charity, to services that she loved and enjoyed that, shaped her growing up, as she mentioned. And, I think that's such an overlooked thing today, right? That, we have the opportunities to, go to a store and, oh, do you want to donate $1? When you're at the Salvation Army around the holidays, you're like, yay, okay, I'm doing that for charity. And it's like, yeah, all right, that's fine. You're doing your sort of service, I guess. But, Saw is actively engaged, right? And one of the things that, reminded me of too is that in my first book, The Impression of a Good Life, Finding Your Song and Dance, when you get back down from the mountain, right? When you realize at the top your potential, these things that you can see out into the distance in your life, even looking back on where you came from, is that you have to get back down the mountain. And at the bottom of the mountain, you realize the sense of, wow, I want to do it again and maybe bring others along with me. And that's this idea of service, right? And Saw really kind of, to me, encapsulates all this idea of service, right? She's doing all this hard work for herself, getting on podcasts, trying to, just give back to others. And, think about for you as a listener, like you've acquired enough experience in this lifetime, right? You're probably not 3 years old listening to this podcast. You're probably whatever in your teens, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, hundreds. We'll get them all there and, you have the potential to give back, right? And just think about what that looks like for you today, right? What does giving back mean, right? And I don't mean just trading time for money. That's not giving back. And I don't mean paying your taxes. I mean the service you provide, not from a business standpoint either. Even just the gestures, right? I just think of the manners, holding a door for somebody and letting someone into traffic, and it's hard for me, right? I live in New England, we're a bunch of assholes driving around here, I'll admit it, it's tough, and then a rush to go nowhere, if you will, but just a reminder to use manners and to respect one another, and, it's really about serving one another. And then we had Melanie Gray. this idea of scrollamitis. I mean, that is absolutely hilarious, right? I mean, not hilarious, but, sort of obviously scary that, it's a disease now that we're scrolling on our phones. But, the thing that actually I had to catch myself in the moment, I was talking about value, right? And you've heard me say it time and time again, there's these 2 definitions of the word value. And, what's interesting, I had to look it up after because I'm like, you know what? I keep saying this, but, it's been about 11 years. It's been 11 years since I've published the first book where I talked about this. And of course, the definition has changed. So if you look at the word value, and, I used to say that, well, it used to be defined as the way in which you were to live your life, right? The things that you uphold in your lifetime, the things that you value, right? Not your inanimate objects or, crap like that. It's things like, your family, your friends, honesty, integrity, those sort of values, speaking the truth, that's what I was talking about. But sure enough, words change like we all do, like the times. And, now the definition means what something is worth. And I just was kinda shocked at that, it was sort of a moment where I was like, "Wow, this is sort of sad," right? That we've changed the meaning, to mean what something is worth. And the problem with that is that now when we say value, we're gonna immediately think, "Wow, this car is not worth jack," you know? I got rust on my car, it's a 2017 Subaru Forester 6-speed, it's now 2026. It's like, it's getting up there, it's got 133,000 miles, and it's like when you talk about value in the sense of what something is worth, you could say that, "Oh, that's only worth a couple grand." But to me, the value is beyond that because I'm driving a car that no one can drive apparently today. It's a great car for, the New England winters, and it's great on gas, right? I mean, I get about 30 miles to the gallon for an SUV. So it was sad, I guess, when I saw that meaning of value. And, Melanie just, we had a great conversation about how we also hated, the question of what do you do? And she said something really great in the sense that the problem is the conversation starts early in life. It starts when you're young. Oh, little Anthony, what do you want to do? And you're like, yeah, I want to be a astronaut and I want to be, we start forming these identities around these professions that our culture has defined. And the problem with that is, when that gets taken away or we don't live up to it, that was our identity. And now our identity gets ripped out the door. Right. And that's not a good feeling. Right. I got fired from a job and, fortunately I'd been doing the work to realize that wasn't my identity, to be a manager in a steel manufacturing company with 40 people under me. I could still be Anthony Tenaglia and live in the world. But, in terms of it just makes you think again, what do you do? I almost want to frame it now as like, what are your goals? I mean, that sounds kind of stupid when you walk up to someone and be like, hey, what's up, John? What are your goals? You don't want to say that. But I guess, for you listeners, if you have another way to, another greeting instead of what do you do, please send me an email, write it in a review or what have you, and or come on the show and talk about it because I really want to find a better way to have conversations with people today. And then we had Danny. And this was actually the second time we recorded. Now, he was such a trooper because the first time we had an awesome conversation. And it was funny because we got done with the second one. He's like, oh man, we didn't even talk about anything from the first one. I'm like, yeah, that's kind of how I roll. I mean, I have the similar questions that I ask, but I let the conversation where people's thoughts and feelings and, where their mind is at kind of steer it in that given moment. And, so we recorded a second time because what sucked was that, unfortunately, the audio didn't clean up in post. And I don't know what happened. I've definitely learned from that. I felt really sort of embarrassed to waste his time, to waste all my time. But he was so great, so patient with the whole process. We got him back on, the recording studio and about a month later, and, his episode launched. And the biggest thing that, of course, he's the Jim Carrey with a PhD. He reminds me of the importance of storytelling, right? And that was again, you hear it a lot, with this idea of, "Oh, you gotta tell your story," and then we equate that with, "Well, let me put on my Instagram story or because that's part of my story, like I'm giving these little scenes of my life." And yeah, it is, right? But the problem with Instagram stories is that, again, we're putting up the best things, right, of what we're doing. And I think story, if you look at the Lord of the Rings, right, or Star Wars or whatever these epic films that I am biased towards, you have great evil and you have the good triumphing over evil. And I think that needs to come into play. Now, don't go on your Instagram story and start crying about how tough the world is and that's your story. I mean, you got to, I guess you don't have to, but I would recommend for better storytelling is to talk about why it sucks, right? And I think that's one of the things that I'm going to start doing on Instagram is talking more about my frustrations, my story of yoga and, I know it's not related to work, but you've heard it from different sort of guests on the show that yoga is a great way to, learn how to these techniques, these skills to manage stress, to manage challenge. And how could that not easily translate over to work? I mean, the answer is yes. Obviously, you can take yoga skills and use them off the mat. But the power of storytelling, that was Danny. And then Kevin. I mean, Kevin was the man. So I was on his podcast, Kevin McShann, and let's have this conversation. And, he has a disability, but I love what he says, right? Don't focus on the disability, focus on the person. I mean, he was it actually really moved me when I was talking with him. I was like, wow, this guy wants to be on my show. He wants to share his message. And I hope I won't say enjoy because it's not about an entertainment. I hope you got something from that episode in that we all feel like we're not good enough. We all feel like we have something missing. There's something wrong with us. And Kevin has, a visible, disability. And he says it all the time. Like people will misjudge that. They'll overlook the person and see the disability. But man, you hear him talk about his enthusiasm and his energy, his ease there. And to me, start incorporating that in your life, right? Even if you have a quote unquote disability, who cares? Like, dig into that, just if you look at Kevin, he's now speaking to workplace cultures on, more inclusive workplace environments with people with disabilities. I mean, how amazing is that story? He got rejected from all these interviews after graduating from college in journalism. And, let's face it, I mean, I don't know what those interviewers said, but I'm sure they were like, "Oh, well, he's got a disability, so he's not gonna fit." Well, sucks for them because now this guy's, like, killing it and doing awesome work on his, his own podcast and doing work, for I believe is, in Canada, the work that he's doing. And again, so think of the importance of language, right? I say it, you've heard me say it before with, I don't like saying things that are negative. They're deltas, things that we can change. And so when you think about, disability or you think about a weakness or you think about whatever, try to spin it like Kevin does, right? Focus on the person, not the disability. And then we had Holly Batram. And she was cool because we talked about she came from an Eastern, philosophy sort of background. She lives in the West, if you will. And, I wanted to jump right in because it was something that I'm finishing up, my third book in a rush to go nowhere, finding Shavasana. And one of the things that I came across is that Sham, in his translation of the Sutras of Patanjali, indicates that people in the West are so fixated on, having others tell them what to do and so much that they're willing to pay thousands of dollars for them to do it. And the problem with that, according to this ancient text, is that's not what the point is of all this. It's about empowerment, right? My question to people when you need a coach, a spiritual guide, or whatever, where did you lose your own confidence along the way? Right? Where was it beaten out of you? As a kid, I have a niece, she's really awesome, just over 2 years, 2.5 years old now. Again, obviously you gotta tell her not to do dangerous things, but she's going out there and just living life. You know what I mean? She don't need someone to tell her what to do. She's whacking a drum, she's playing with the dogs, rolling around the grass, whatever she's doing, she's for to have fun. But people today are like, "Well, I might need a coach, I might need a spiritual guide to tell me what to do." I think the thing with that is that we're afraid to sit still. I think that's a problem. We can't sit with ourselves. Kids, they can sit with themselves. They play, they laugh, they whatever, right? You hear me say it, and I'll say it again. The book from the Laughter Yoga book, kids will laugh 400 times a day, adults less than 15, right? Adults can't sit with themselves. They're so afraid of their disabilities, their imperfections, they're not coaches, they're not whatever. It's like, but when you can sit and just, I could think back to Matt, right? And just play guitar to play guitar. That's awesome, right? You don't need a coach to tell you to play guitar. Just go play guitar. So as you can see, Holly and I were certainly talking a lot about coaches, and she even said, she's like, "Oh, I can see why you'd be so against it," and she was before too. And a coach, and again, I guess like, she indicates that it's all about the feedback, right? And I don't disagree with that, right? So when I, again, was playing golf, competitive golf, I would go see Dan Diskin, at Amherst Country Club. He's no longer there. I think he moved to Florida. And he would tweak my swing, and he would, say, "Hey, Tony, your rhythm's off," or whatever. And he would literally coach me on my golf swing. But I guess like to have gotten that point, I would practice for hours, right? I would spend almost a lot of Saturdays hitting balls for 5 to 6 hours a day, chipping and putting, for hours on end. And then I would go see the coach, right? So there's a fine line, right? I think, with having a coach, with someone guiding you. I think my issue with coaching, as I really thought about our conversation with Holly, is that in the West, we unfortunately equate it with this idea of, okay, if I spend thousands of dollars on this coach, this money therefore will give me happiness. And I don't like that sort of like, sort of black and white simple correlation. The problem with that is that we can be happy when we're doing the simple things, right? I think back to Matt, right? Playing his guitar, learning to draw. I think back to Mark when he's, learning his lines, to be in a TV show. I think that's we can find joy in those things, right? And I think that's what's overlooked. And we all have the power to do that. I'm giving you the power, right? I'll be your coach today and I will tell you that you have the power, you have the ability, you have the confidence, you have the skill to try something today. And you know what? If you do it and it sucks, who cares? Who friggin' cares? Just try it again and try it again. I recently I love Rush, the band Rush, and Annika Niles, she's friggin' killing it for, Neil Peart unfortunately passed away, their drummer. And Annika Niles is playing with Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson touring, across the country now. And Annika is playing matchstick. And it's a way that you hold the drums. And Neil Peart, growing up, he's one of my huge idols in the drumming world. And he got me into playing traditional. And Annika, is playing match, and I just can see her fluidity. She's amazing. She's an awesome drummer. Go YouTuber. And, I'm like, oh, well, let me play match grip. I'm gonna tell you it sucked, but I'm still trying to do it. My like hand hurts, because I'm so used to playing it the other way. And you know what? It doesn't matter, right? Yeah, I could go have a coach tell me, oh, you hold the stick like this and that. And yes, if you want to learn technique, I get it, right? But I guess, like, to me, I think of back when I think it was Jack Nicklaus, a golfer. He said that, he learned to hit the ball hard and far, and then he got coached on how to control it. And I think there's a thing to that because if you come into something thinking, "Oh, I'm so scared, I gotta do one step at a time and be perfect," you're not gonna get the full essence, right? I guess, like, I don't know how to describe that or articulate it yet, and maybe you do and you wanna come on the show and talk about it, right? But I think, like, when you try to swing hard, try to hit the ball hard, but then know that, "Okay, I'm gonna refine this," that's different, right? And maybe that's what coaches do today. I don't know. But that was June 2026 guests. All amazing. Loved all the conversations. Again, thanks for taking the time for your reviews. They've been really awesome to read. And I'll be, showcasing a review every month now on the show. And, just to also as future stuff on the show, I want to start integrating video into upcoming episodes. We'll see how that goes. No promises for sure. I definitely, I'm going to hold myself accountable for saying this out loud. But video seems to be the new thing, and July you're going to start seeing more of my face, good or bad, and that of the guests. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.